Jenny Clark with Solvability, and we're gearing up for the Florida Devcon Summit on March 29th and 30th, 2017 at the DoubleTree West Shore in Tampa. So leading up to that, we want to talk a little bit about the vision for the Florida Devcon Summit and for this podcast. We're trying to raise the voices of Florida's federal communities. We're trying to help small businesses win more federal contracts, and we're trying to set them up for teaming for the bigger federal deals. So today I want to talk about one of the topics that we should be discussing at the Florida Devcon Summit, and that is about innovation. And what I'm really asking is, as a small business, where is my innovation budget? Everybody talks about innovation, but nobody wants to pay for it. Large businesses will say that development projects done by small business are cheaper and more agile. And of course they are. It's cheaper to hire a small business to do these projects than it is to work with other divisions of their own firm. Because in a large firm, it's harder to negotiate across groups. You've got revenue and profit sharing issues. Overruns get transferred to one side or the other, and it becomes hard to manage inside a corporation, even using its own assets. But with small businesses, program managers find they can easily ramp up or down, decisions can be made quickly, and if needed, sadly, the small business project can be turned off just as quickly. The first project to be cut in a downturn are the small business subcontractors, as we know. They're expendable. We need to be more innovative in the federal market, but the federal market is backwards. You don't find a customer need and try to fill it. You watch for industry briefings, you watch for expiring contracts, you get your teams connected with target agencies, and then you wait for something to come out and see if you can still qualify to bid based on the NAICS codes and the set-asides you might qualify for. So that begs the question, where can innovation come from? We all know people that build their own rockets or robots and software, but we also know that in an age where our margins are ever more slim, it's very high emphasis on reducing costs that leaves very little room for experimentation. How do we fund innovation anyway? If you want a small business to be innovative, great. But in the federal market, they're doing everything they can just to bid and deliver on the work they've got. There's very little excess funding for them to do any type of a R&D effort. So what you're really thinking about is, I know as a small business owner, they shouldn't be using retirement funds to fund this innovation. They've got kids in college. Investors, well, you really can't go to an investor unless you've got something that's viable and market ready. They're not going to invest at the prototype stage in what you're talking about. And on the other hand, you really can't spend all your time developing prototypes or raising capital. And if you talk to small businesses in commercial markets, that's what they say is the biggest time usage that they're spending, is trying to get their product developed, but at the same time constantly going to meetings to try to raise funding for them to be able to proceed. So it's even more intense in the federal market. So how do we create innovation in the federal market, especially using the agility, adaptability, and responsiveness of small business? What are the mechanisms to respond to innovation requirements for the Department of Defense? Despite claims for planned acquisition reform, we're still in that old model. Develop requirements, announce potential procurement, draft the RFP, write the RFP, review industry responses, award the contract, respond to protests, begin contract execution, hope that the funding continues, and for the small contractor, be prepared for unplanned events, because when they did that proposal, might have been 18 months or 2 years prior to the contract starting, they're having to estimate in all the things that could happen over which they have no control. For example, just the changes in the Affordable Care Act caused some questions and some increases in health care. Those weren't programmed in to the pricing for those contracts, and those contracts could go out 3 to 5 years with very little escalation built into the rates. So high risk just to do the regular work, no way you're going to go into the innovation side. Also, the cost of going after federal work keep increasing. It takes a lot of energy and time and money to develop relationships. You've got to have systems to track the RFP processes and multiple systems to do that. You've got to create teams, and as you do that, you're going to have associated legal expenses to create those teams when you don't really even know if you're going to have a win at the end. You've got the time and effort for preparing and submitting the proposals. The technical specs are the first part, and most of the small businesses have ways to address that because that is their area of expertise. But then there's all kinds of requirements within the proposal and related to the proposal, especially on the cost side, where you've got to certify compliance in your financial systems. You've got to be capable of doing the contract administration. You've got to be able to prepare a compliant cost volume. You also have to have access to lines of credit. So the question is this even a viable strategy, especially in these days where we've got shrinking profit margins? I also wanted to point out that the risks are very high for these small businesses. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of some that I've encountered over the last several years. And these are just ones that I see. Doesn't mean there's not more of them all over the place. In working with a company that does advanced internet surveillance, they're trying to get on with a federal agency, but the federal agency wants them to set it up as an IDIQ, implying that we're going to set up fixed price billing rates or a time and material style so that we can put you, we can buy your services by the hour. Well, that's great, except they've got very highly compensated, specialized software developers and database administrators to do this work. And while they need to be competitive enough to bring on the right people at a price that's fair to the government, they also have to be able to put in some escalation into the rates. They need to cover some costs that probably aren't yet even identified. These database administrators and software developers have a lot of software tools. Those tools need to be updated. There are new ones coming out that make you more efficient. There's so many ways that those become increasing overhead or support costs that weren't factored in when the pricing was coming in. So there's a real catch-22 in that part of the system. The other thing that happens in some of these contracts is the next attempt is to say, well, let's make this cost plus or cost reimbursable, because cost plus contracts were absolutely made for the R&D world. You don't know the exactly what's going to be developed and how it's going to be done, so they're saying, well, we're going to pay your cost plus a reasonable allocation for your overhead and G&A and a percentage for fee. But again, these are small companies, and they are not financially and system-wise prepared to take on the complexity of cost plus contracting. So we're overburdening them with these additional requirements. I was working with another company that was doing video capture products, and they had been 4 or 5 years into a contract that was terminated for convenience. They were a subcontractor. Their subcontract was fixed price. Part of the reason it was fixed price is because they said, we can do this work, but we're not prepared to handle cost reimbursable contracts. Oddly enough, their current system was approved for cost reimbursable because another agency was coming in and wanting to award them some R&D contracts. But what happened was the fixed price subcontract became an audible cost reimbursable claim because the auditors came in and said, we've got to settle this termination for convenience. Whether you had the records prepared or not prepared going back those several years, you've got to go create those records so that we can do an audit in order to settle that claim. Huge expense on that small company, and certainly they need to comply in order to allow the auditors to do their job. But it's almost like they've got a retroactive rule being applied to them, where retroactively they're applying the current rules to contract costs that might have been 3 to 5 years prior to the period in which they were terminated. And then, of course, I have a third case, and this is with the SBIR Small Business Innovator Research Program. When SBIRs are awarded, they are typically initially awarded as cost-plus contracts. Because they're cost-plus contracts, they fall under the allowable cost and payment clause, which requires those small companies, those immature companies, those young companies with unsophisticated accounting systems and young accounting people to do what's called an incurred cost submission, which is basically a tax return for a government contractor's fiscal year data. Has all kinds of schedules and tabs, and even though I've done a lot of them, it takes some time, and it's not something that somebody can just pick up and say, oh, let me just fill in this form and we'll be done. It's a major effort. So what happened is, at first they were told they didn't have to do an incurred cost submission, then they were told they did, and then it went back and forth, and that happened. The other thing is the location of the company was out in the west, and it was unclear whether the audit was going to be performed out of 1 or 2 or 3 different offices. So it kept bouncing around. Who's going to do the audit? When is the audit going to happen? Have you submitted your incurred cost submission? And there were deadlines for them to have submitted their incurred cost submission, and the DCA said, I can't find it, and they changed the rules on how it was supposed to be submitted. They had said, send it over here. Nope, send it over there. So obviously, the small companies running around, repeating all these steps, trying to comply over and over, incurring those costs as they do that. So DCAA finally shows up after rescheduling, and they were supposed to look at 2011. And they said, well, as long as we're here, we'd like you to prepare and give us all the information for 2012 and 2013. They finally get through all of that, and they said, well, we're just going to do 2011. We're not going to do 2012 and 2013. So what's really going on is the small companies want to participate in these R&D programs. They have technology. They have innovation. They have things that they can share. But we've got some pretty serious burdens on them in order to make sure that they have the financial backup, the systems backup in order to be able to comply with this. And the burden for a small business to have an auditor in for 2 or 3 days is much higher than a large corporation to have an auditor in for 2 or 3 days. It's extremely disruptive. It's practically shutting down the company because normally it's the executives of the company or the chief executive that has to be there to work with the auditor, provide what's needed. It's just a humongous burden. So, you know, we need to be looking at new models for innovation, and certainly there are things like hackathons, and there's programs that SOCOM has started, like OpenWorks and SoftWorks, and they're having some success, and they have some prizes awarded for the people that succeed with solving the problem. They've got a series of 30-day projects. They've even got ways that remote teams can participate. So they're getting participation from a lot of different sources, and they're developing methods along the way for how to more rapidly document and test and demonstrate their products. Those are all really good. But we also need to be looking at what is a reasonable approach to creating these collaborative teams, and how do you set it up so that if you want small business to participate, they have a way to get compensated for their participation short of having to go through an entire contracting process. And it might be that we create 90-day classrooms or some kind of collaborative teams or something like that where they can send their key person into that setting to work on a collaborative team, and the company is being compensated for supplying that innovator, that expert, to try to solve the problem in a very facilitated and managed way. This is something we're really going to have to be looking at. In Stan McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, he talks about how he and the task force had to respond and learn how to respond differently and better to Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations, because there were so many ways that those organizations, which seemed to have no hierarchy or no structure, could continually respond and keep moving forward. So they tried to figure out what can we do and how do we do that, and developed a concept they called shared consciousness. And then what they had to decide is, yes, we have all these silos, we have this need to know and all these separate entities, and we have separate people and separate organizations with the responsibilities, but we've got to find some way to break down those silos and share information and recognize that taking immediate action outweighs some of the information sharing risks. They also did things like they mix up the team. So they'd say, okay, here's the team of these special operators. We're going to bring in an outsider. We're going to put some analysts in with the people that are going in and gathering the information. We're going to have to do something similar in small business innovation in the federal market. So there might be 90-day projects. There might be virtual collaborators. There might be shared technologies that could be later translatable to commercial markets. And that's a big initiative that's going on right now. If you think about products that have been developed in today's market that originally came out of DARPA, like GPS and those types of resources. And the question is also, how do you accept failure as part of the process of improvement? And how do you track the lessons learned so that you can apply those to ongoing programs? So these are the kind of discussions that we want to bring forth for the Florida Devcon Summit. It's going to be an informal layout with panelists sitting up at the front of the room on bar stools, telling a few key points about what they think is most important to the audience related to their markets, and then going to sections of the room for tables where there'll be breakout sessions. So it's more like a conversation around a kitchen table about what can we do and how can we collaborate. We've built in a lot of networking time. We've got some panels that are more on corporate topics, M&A, joint ventures, finance and accounting compliance issues, cybersecurity. But the whole idea is to bring together small business innovators that are in a position where they're second stage companies, they're ready to move forward, ready to prime, and help them connect with teammates and agencies that have methods that they can move forward and work together. So we hope to see you at Florida GovCon Summit. If you're interested in learning more, the first thing to do would be to go to our LinkedIn community, floridagovcon.com, and we'd be glad to share information about our event, which is March 29th and 30th, 2017 in Tampa at the DoubleTree West Shore. And the easiest way to get to that link is to type in govconconference.com, and that'll take you straight to the event page. So thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to talking more about innovation and how we're going to get there.